To all my A-listers and practitioners, welcome back to this thing of ours in another episode of the Chronicles of Gameology. I'm your host, Neil K. Marcellus, and yeah, that's checkmate. You know, these days where fellowshipping occurs and where the status quo is circulated and held up as being gospel, those who sip the Kool-Aid, their tongues are tied. And they are hush-hush and are dogmatic about maintaining a conspiracy of silence, downplaying what is obvious and point blank. So much so, if they were to be exposed to the brutal honesty, the very act would be equivalent of sounding like a gunshot from a 308 19-inch barrel Winchester rifle. So many may find what I'm about to say damaging to their eardrums, but the straight and narrow, or the avenue of least resistance, is simply the path of the habitual loser, who is driven unconsciously to donate themselves as crash test dummies, which is a pervasive kind of psychosis dragging a lot of men these days down a bottomless rabbit hole. But there is an exception to this kind of tomfoolery. Individuals who is considered to be a cut above the rest, the A-listers, who didn't shy away from dealing with the grit that will forever linger if a man decline that is, to deal with it head on. This ties us into the topic and title surrounding this episode. You see, this game, this street philosophy, doesn't accept draftees. It is strictly centered and predicated on those who makes it their business to take up the initiative and tell life to go ahead and rack them up, because anything lesser would be considered as hustling backwards. But this attitude that I just highlighted isn't universally and broadly accepted. Case in point, those who broadcast and preach this particular schism referred to as passport bros. Now, if you're not aware, this is where dudes located here in the US are traveling to other countries in search of more cooperative and agreeable females. And FYI, and for the sake of clarity, this is not to throw shade on men who legitimately is just exploring their options, but to point out what this street philosophy, this concept called game, categorizes as illogical thinking, or a disjointed type of trick logic. You see, intent will always and forever point back to motives. And for the record, I'm in full compliance on how the hierarchy, the food chain, is set up when it comes to this chessboard we call life, which positions the ism at the top, the executive level, where it sits over all 304s, and all 304s run roughshod and is over all tricks. And this is also to say I have no problem with a man wanting to trick. You see, the issue is with this disjointed type of trick logic, where a man would jump through hoops and try to rationalize to others on exactly why he does X, Y, and Z in a given situation, when the real motive is so plainly obvious. Now, this disjointed type of trick logic that is indicative of how a passport bro or a man who shares this kind of sentiment goes about their decision making. But guys who prescribe to this point of view is inflicted with a similar infliction that this author of this book that I'm currently showing, which is titled How to Become a Successful Trader, highlights in particular. But this author points out that those who work on Wall Street and those who try to trade for a living have a pervasive and a disjointed view towards stocks and other commodities traded on the stock market. So those who play the financial markets and passport bros have the same issue. This infliction that this author points out have to do with being overly gun shy from the onslaught of randomness, meaning that individuals who play the stock market can't handle the boundless opportunities to place a trade into the vast ocean of financial securities, and then get those same financial securities to do exactly as they wish, which is to make money. So by the same token, a passport bro is inundated with truckloads of easy to access females here in America of all shapes, sizes, and colors, but they can't get none of these women to act exactly the way they desire. Last time I checked, there was 331.9 million people here in America, and over half of them is women. So the sample size is plentiful. So let me point out the underlying issue that passport bros and the unsuccessful stock trader have failed to deal with. And this is the reluctance and inability to manage pressure and resistance, which organically happens as a byproduct of making one's way across this chessboard we call life. But the pressure and resistance I'm particularly highlighting, which directly points to the issue with the passport bros, which instinctively crystallizes due to a certain kind of anxiety that is consistent and tenacious and making itself known within the human psyche. But this particular kind of pressure and resistance has been going on for thousands, and I mean thousands of years, which is none other than the unresolved sexual chemistry, the cat and mouse chess game making up the male and female relationship dynamic. So within this street philosophy called game, there's an excellence, a standard of conduct that solidifies a man's position to be recognized as an A-lister, someone who is successful at playing this cat and mouse interplay. And this standard of conduct, this body of wisdom, if a man is fortunate enough, is passed on to him by a seasoned OG. But the body of wisdom is referred to as the catching hand. It is the quintessential body of knowledge from a street perspective on how to be smooth and savvy when it comes to dealing with the ladies. Now, since the topic of this episode is also geared towards the necessity of a man showing resilience by handling pressure and resistance, as indicated by the image making up this thumbnail. So when a man is properly laced up as it pertains to the application of this body of knowledge referred to as the catching hand, then there is a heightened sense of awareness and understanding about the nature of pressure and resistance. Also, a man who is gamed up and a skilled player of the catching hand is afforded a repertoire of skill sets and techniques. One in particular I will spotlight here in a second. And of course, this profound insight can be associated as thinking like a chess player, because on this channel I equate an individual, a practitioner of this craft, who is on top of their shit as thinking like a chess player. So a sure sign that a chess player haven't taken the avenue of least resistance and knows exactly how pressure works is when a chess player knows how to use and implement a tactic referred to as a bluff. You see, a bluff delivered like it means business is more beneficial than a serious threat interpreted as a bluff. This pivots around a skilled chess player inducing butterflies in the stomachs of their competitors, which requires the chess player to be up to speed on playing both sides of the chessboard. And this dualistic understanding translates into the fact that pressure and resistance doesn't operate as a one-dimensional phenomenon, because in actuality it's a multifaceted, a multi-directional kind of occurrences. Now, lay your eyes on this image I'm currently showing. So here's the deal. Pressure and resistance from the perspective of this street philosophy orchestrates its influence and works its mojo from both ends of the spectrum, so to speak. Now peep out this diagram sitting to the right from on this image. You see, being properly laced up about how the catching hand prepares a practitioner to deal with unresolved sexual chemistry, it is then understood that pressure and resistance pushes inwardly from the outside, as indicated by these green arrows, which represents how the environment dishes out its influence, and all the while strikes outwardly from the inside out indicated by these white arrows on this same diagram, which acts as influential forms of influence originating internally from a practitioner's own thoughts and their own habits. So an example of how the environment applies pressure that can greatly enhance a man's mental maturity. Zeroing in on this depiction to the left of this diagram. Despite the constant campaign and mudslinging and dirty politics towards the so-called male aggression, being up under this type of pressure that's indicated by this depiction, this undoubtedly helps a man to become a more solid individual. But this is called G-checking. Big homies and OGs would consistently push the line, giving you the incentive to man up, so to speak. I did an entire episode on the benefits of this kind of positive peer pressure. Here's the link. Check it out once you finish viewing this episode. But this type of pressure nurtures one's ability to develop this resilience and mental tolerance I've been speaking about. Now, a few moments ago, I mentioned a particular skill set that a man develops as a byproduct of him contending with pressure and resistance by applying the techniques taught and emphasized within the body of knowledge known as the catching hand. So check out this illustration of this female flashing her bedroom eyes and displaying this come hither look towards this gameologist hovering above her head that I have up on the screen at this moment. This is referred to as the manhunt impulse. You see, as a consequence of a man developing resilience and mental tolerance that I've been speaking about, and him knowing how to leverage a societal overkill where females is overly social engineered to be sugar and spice and everything nice. He then knows how to work certain leverage points organically positioned within a female's own unresolved sexual chemistry that she welcomes, and when activated simply drives her crazy, where she without delay is then driven subconsciously to make him, the man utilizing this form of leverage, her main focus, and she will start seducing him organically and naturally, i.e. the manhunting impulse. So in closing, what the passport bros and squares in general doesn't realize is that the only place where success comes before hard work is in the dictionary. And so if a man is dead set on taking the avenue of least resistance and shortcuts, then as a consequence, he will end up being the one to get cut short. For the sheer fact that when the mind is weak, situations present themselves as being inconceivable, overpowering any forward momentum that the individual can muster. Even when the mind is balanced, situations can still be considered greatly challenging. But when the mind is gamed up, situations simply manifest and become opportunities. Now that's checkmate. Thanks for watching. We'll definitely catch you on the next episode.